Evan, I know that we've followed you quite a bit on Twitter or X for a long time, and you are very much diving into the analytics behind basketball, and you do some very interesting things. You talk about most impactful big men. You talk about best duos in the SEC, and just looking back at our tweets back and forth, who are the best three-man lineups in college basketball. Give us your perspective on Florida Gators basketball and what's worked so well for them and how they've been able to be so successful this year.
If I had to pick a couple things, the first would be I think that their backcourt, when you talk about Walter Clayton, Will Richard, Elijah Martin, that three-guard combo is arguably as good as anyone in the country. I haven't run the numbers recently to see analytically where that stacks up in terms of my player metrics, but it would for sure be probably top three at least. So when you have that, and then you're getting this production on the back end of the season from Alex Condon and Thomas Haug, where we had earlier games this season, like Florida's loss at home to Missouri, where it was like the guards are good, but the front court is just lacking. And then you flip the page and see how they absolutely not just handled or stayed toe to toe with Auburn's big men, but arguably played better than them down the stretch on the road. I think was really impressive. So when you talk about the development of their front court, I think that's huge. The other thing that I think about this team is, analytically speaking, this team has one of the highest ceilings, if not the highest ceiling in the country. I mean, they arguably got the best win in the country this weekend on the road to Auburn. In terms of how consistent Florida is game to game, they are one of the least consistent teams in the country. What that means is they could have one game where they play absolutely lights out and they're good enough to beat anybody. And then you could have another game where they kind of lay an egg, and there's more of a variance from game to game with this team. And so I think what that means for me is a result like we saw against Auburn, where not only did they beat them, we certainly knew that was possible, but they absolutely crushed them really from about the midway point of that first half all the way through the end. That's totally in the cards. But next game, they could really struggle in a game that they're not supposed to. And so, I think that's a little bit interesting thinking about their prospects in the tournament, because I do think at their best, they're able to beat anybody, but are they able to string that consistently 6 games in a row? I'm not sure. So that'll be a little bit interesting to track going forward.
Is there anything in the numbers that tell you does a high scoring or low scoring game favor Florida?
Good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I do really think when you look at the makeup of this team, you can really tell when they're having an on night or not based on if they're just able to quickly rack up points. One of the things that I track on my website that you may be familiar with is the kill shot, which is any time that a team scores 10 or more unanswered points. It's kind of a way of measuring, are you able to go on scoring runs or sort of spurt ability in games to really kind of flip the script quickly? And looking at Florida, they are one of only 3 teams in the SEC to average at least one 10-0 run per game. And what that means is pretty much about once per game, if not more, this team is going to go on a run where they score 10, 12, 15 points unanswered. And that's a really good sign for this team in the sense that if you're behind, you can flip the script. If you're kind of in a close game, you can quickly, put a lead together. And on the flip side, they only have given up 6 10-0 runs all season. That's less than about 0.25 a game. So it's pretty rare that they give them up. So when you have that in the cards, that's a pretty good ingredient for success typically.
What do you think, Evan, is, I mean, I know that you probably think the ceiling is a national championship, but what are you realistically looking for out of the Gators over the next couple of weeks to kind of solidify where you think that they might end up come March? Or I guess
I would really like to see them push for that 1 seed. I believe they can do it. I believe that they are good enough to do it. I think they're good enough to compete for at least a share of the SEC title if they play well. I have Florida ranked 4th in the country, and that's a pretty big deal considering the fact that the top 3 teams analytically in terms of who I predict to be the best going forward, Duke, Houston, and Auburn have been for a while a tier above everyone else. But then Florida is that next team in there. So I really want to see them consistently grinding out results. The SEC, man, we've talked about all year how good this conference is. It's historically great, and that just means that every single game is going to be a dogfight. And it's one thing to, be on your best game and have a result like they had against Auburn on the road, but to do that every single night in and night out is more difficult. And so that's what I want to see from this Florida team is, can they consistently be excellent in this conference? It's going to be a tough task, but I do think they're good enough to do it. And I think I would really like to see them kind of reach that potential there.
I think what has been impressive to me, Florida's not a really deep rotation team. I just looked up the numbers. They're really like a 7-man rotation. This past week, coming off of that bad loss in Knoxville, you had to play at home without Walt, and then you go on the road at number 1. You're playing without Elijah, and you're talking about how good that front court is, that 3-man front court. Were you impressed at how they were able to play Walt, who I think, am I out of base saying like he could be an SEC Player of the Year contention, and you're playing without him? And then also, is it good to maybe get an Urban Klasvar and some other guys some looks? Because if you come down to the tournament, you're playing so many games, and hey, if we need somebody else to get a shot, hey, they've gotten some reps, some looks here late in the year.
I think the fact that they had Klavchar come out of pretty much nowhere. I mean, I'm sure Auburn, he was not anywhere in their top 5, 6, 7 players on the scout.
Probably not on the scout at all.
Yeah. And for him to hit those threes like he did, if you have that coming off your bench, that's a really big deal. So, I think the thing that I look about at this team is Walter Clayton definitely is the best player in this team. Like you mentioned, I think he is a first-team SEC, teamer, potentially a first-team All-American if he continues to play well. But I do not think that this team relies on one guy to be excellent in order to win. When you look at their starting 5, Walter Clayton, Will Richard, Elijah Martin, Condon, and then throwing Haugen there as well as their 6th man. All 5 of those guys rank top 100 in the country in my player value metric, Bayesian performance rating. Basically what that means is when you look at what they are bringing to the team on a per possession basis, both in terms of their individual production, but also in terms of how they are impacting their team's chances of winning and of scoring better than the opponent, they are in the top 100 most valuable players in the country. And so you miss a guy like Martin, bummer, but you still have 4 guys in the top 100. So I love that, because it means that you don't, number one, if a guy's out, you're not, your game plan isn't ruined. And 2, even if you have a guy or 2 have a bad game, you still have several others who can have a big impact. And so I really like that for sure.
No, just looking back, I'm trying to get the exact stats here, but obviously, Elijah Martin doesn't play in this game, but then you get Denzel Aberdeen, who came in and really did a great job. And I think at one point the Gators were 5 or 6 games into the year and had 5 or 6 different players score the most points to start the season. And it seems like there's a lot of back and forth with this team. They seem to play really well for each other. They seem to be completely bought in to the golden era here at the University of Florida. What are some things, and I'm sorry if I missed it, what are some things that you'd like to see them improve on if they really need to get a deep run in March and April?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I already mentioned is just the consistency game to game, just because metrically they are, one of the more inconsistent teams. I do think another thing when I look at just ingredients for success with this team, a metric that I've kind of identified for them on a game-to-game basis really is that they often do live and die by the 3-point shooting. Mm-hmm. This season, when they shoot, I have a cool feature on my website called Keys to Victory, where for every single given team, it basically pulls up all of your team stats from a given game and identifies the ones that are most important to your specific team success. And if you boil it down to one metric for Florida, it is 3-point shooting. And specifically when they shoot above 34.5% from 3 this year, under Todd Golden over the last couple years, they are 38-8. That's over 80% wins. And when they're under that mark, they're losing more games than they're winning. And that's a bigger disparity between wins and losses than most teams have. And so for this team, it's like, if you are shooting the ball reasonably well, you're going to win almost every single time. And when you're not, it's tough. So, I think you're going to have games where they do shoot the ball well, and then it's pretty hard to beat them. But do you have another way of winning when the 3-point shots aren't going in? Because, this team is really tough to guard on the 3-point line. They have so many capable scorers and so many shifty guards who can create shots. But some games it's not going in, and in that case, you got to find another way to win. So, how are you going to do that?
That sounds like That sounds like you could have said that about Billy Donovan's teams. That feels like Florida basketball has been live by the three, die by the three for 30 years.
No, you're good.
Yeah,
I think it's the exact same opposite on the defensive end on our L's. We didn't defend the three good in every L. Am I wrong on that stat?
Yeah, let me pull that up here.
While you're looking that up, there's definitely been some games where, like Missouri just like one of those games where you just like tip your hat and you're like, okay, I guess the basket is the size of the Pacific
Or
Ocean.
even Kentucky, right? I mean,
Yeah,
Kentucky
Kentucky,
couldn't hit the
same
broad
way.
side of the art.
Yeah, specifically those Kentucky and Missouri games, they did not defend a three well in those games. Tennessee, they did, but Tennessee is a bit of a different animal. They have their own way of winning and grind it out affairs. So I don't think that applies as much.
Yeah, when Florida beat Tennessee here, it's like Tennessee is physical. They were like a football team, and like, hey, we're going to play this brand. And I think Florida came out and was more physical with Condon, with Hawk, with who I've dubbed Florida's Dennis Rodman, Chinyelu, who is good for at least 6 points, 12 boards, and 3 to 4 shoves a game. Kind of playing that enforcer role. But yeah, we're talking about a team that's only lost 3 games, but there has been, I think, like lapses on the defensive end, especially early on in games where they will get out to other teams will get out to a big lead early.
Yeah. Just pulling this up now, like all 3 losses that Florida's had this year, the opponent has shot better from 3 than them. It's pretty simple. So, and sometimes that's hard to control, but game plan wise, it's certainly very important.
Yeah, and I know that Kentucky game was a Bria that was just shooting lights out. I think he had 24, 26 points in that game, and then he followed up the next couple of games. And I don't even know if over the course of the next 4 or 5 games he had 26 points total. So sometimes a player just gets hot, and he got hot. So what other questions you guys got before we? I want everybody to go visit evanmaya.com. I think it's a fantastic website. There's a lot of stuff on there you can get for free. I'd encourage you to support him. It's a very fair, I think, monthly charge of, I believe, $5. Right. So a lot of great analytical stuff on there, including who are the best top 100 players. What are the best lineup metrics for the Florida Gators, or if you're looking to do some advanced scouting of your own of who the Gators might play. But any final questions before we let Evan run?
Have we gotten eyes on Johnny Broom, or was he still in Alex Condon's pocket when Florida left Auburn?
No comment there.
He's still serving pizza to the. Can you imagine how bad it must?
One of the best players in the country.
Imagine how bad it smelled inside of that basketball stadium, and all those people camping out for a week. That's just bonkers. I hope they went home and took a shower. You know what I mean?
Well, first off, shout out to Bruce Pearl, because like that's
we will not be
Auburn,
shouting out Bruce Pearl on the show.
We just did. The Auburn basketball fans are lunatics. So shout out to them. I remember someone made a deal about them camping out for like 5 days, and they were like, oh, it's because Bronny's coming to town. And they were like, how dare you? And they community noted that poor journalists. But yeah, Bruce Pearl's a great coach. As a member of, or a journalist from the Jewish Journal was interviewing Todd after the Vanderbilt win about 2 Jewish coaches playing together. Bruce Pearl, Mensch, great guy.
He hit him with a shalom.
Yeah,
I saw that.
Hit him with a shalom. Yeah.
All right, Evan, go. Did you
go
have
ahead,
a question, or did you just want to pump up the Auburn student section?
I wanted to pump up Auburn. Our fans like when I pump up the other schools. And I was also just APB for Johnny Broom.
Oh, okay, very good.
Well, did you guys bring up the 2-man lineups thing yet that they mentioned on the ESPN broadcast?
We did not. That would be great for you to bring it up.
Yeah. So basically, on the broadcast during the game, I think it was Jay Billis mentioned that Todd Golden had directly told him that the 2-man lineup of Thomas Haug and Alex Condon was rated the best in the SEC. That directly comes from my website. So if you look at the best,
or Richard? I think it was Richard and Haug.
Oh, are you sure about that?
That's what it says on your website now. Could have changed.
Oh, hold on, let me pull this up here.
Maybe a couple days ago.
No, so lineup. So it depends on your possession threshold.
Oh,
so if you pull up under the lineup metrics section, lineup ratings, best two-man lineups in the SEC who have played over 300 possessions together. It's Alex Condon and Thomas Haug, and they're comfortably first there. So, looking at pairs who have played a decent amount. And Todd Golden mentioned that, and there was reference on the broadcast. That directly comes from my website, and basically you can look at any combination of players, two players together, 3, 4, 5, etc. And it also adjusts for the strength of opponent that those specific players face when they're on the court. But yeah, that duo has been really, really good. And I think definitely a very underrated part of how good Florida has been. And as we mentioned, they've just gotten a lot better recently.
In one of the rankings on there, I think was it the Bayesian rating? I'm just trying to, I'm kind of going off memory here, but it basically ranks your offensive output, your defensive rate, and it kind of combines the score. You have Thomas Haug. I know he plays less, right? He's more of a 6-man, but as the highest net rating on the Gators roster, which I think shows just how valuable he is. Obviously, he plays less possessions, but just shows how valuable and how deep, I guess, the Gators are.
Yeah, I mean, basically a lot of it comes down to not only is his on an individual efficiency level are his numbers good, but when he is on the floor, specifically Florida's offense has been like awesome. They are, when I look at his on-off splits, the offense is scoring 16 more points per 100 possessions when Thomas Haug is on the floor versus on the bench. So that basically points to like when he is on the floor, he is really making a difference in terms of their offensive flow, and whether it's him scoring or someone else, he's a really critical part of this offense. And so that's reflected in his high BPR because it's basically showing that, hey, when this guy is on the court, good things are happening. So, let's give him credit for that.
So I do want to ask a question from the chat here. It's from our friend Valen. He said, how do you get those numbers when there are 5 players on the court at the same time? I think I have an idea, but if you could break that down.
Yeah, so for I'm assuming he's asking about the 2-man lineups because basically, obviously when there's 5 players on the court, you have each specific lineup, but getting those 2-man numbers is basically saying, okay, look at all the lineups that Florida has played and then filter it down just the times when both Alex Condon and Thomas Haug are on the floor. So it doesn't matter who the other 3 guys are, just the possessions when at least those 2 are on the court versus not on the court. And that's sort of how you can break it down into smaller sections of players. And I think that's really helpful about that is 5-man lineup data is can be somewhat unreliable, especially early on in the season, or if it's a lineup that hasn't played much, because there are so many different combinations of players that a team plays that unless it's your starting lineup or your second or third lineup, there's just not a lot of sample size to go off of. But when you break it down into smaller groups and say these 2 guys together, these 3 guys together, the amount of sample size we have to deal with to get more of a reasonable conclusion as to what's happening is much more reliable, and that's really helpful there.
Awesome. You're getting more data points when you
exactly
narrow your focus.
Evan.
Exactly.
I love that. So
you said that even like Coach Golden, I know a lot of these coaches use you guys analytics. How much of basketball and just sports in general do you think like analytics is changing? Like, do you expect like more analytical roles around sports in the future?
I mean, I think it's increasing every year. I think people are realizing that the more that you can use data to quantify the unquantifiable and move away from just your own opinions on things, but combining data with your own expert knowledge to kind of get the best of both worlds, the better in the long run you're going to be. And so, I really do think it depends on the sport, but like baseball has been the frontier of this for a while. Partly is because it's sliced into so many easy ways to kind of get data splits and things like that it makes sense that was the first sport. But I think basketball is one of the next ones, just because you can boil a game down to single possessions at a time, and you can say what happened on this possession. And so in that sense, it's a lot easier than say a sport like soccer where, you only have a couple goals a game and you have a continuous play happening for, 4 or 5 minutes at a time. So I think it makes sense that basketball is kind of the second sport, at least in America, to be really embracing the analytics movement. And I think especially within the college realm, I find it so fascinating because when we get to the transfer portal, right? The way that teams used to recruit was you would be looking at a guy in high school, you'd watch him on film, you'd go to his games for several years, you develop a relationship, and by the time that you're ready to sign him, you know pretty well how good he is, at least as a high school player. Well, now in college, you have to make evaluations on players in a matter of a couple weeks, a week, several days, depending on when they enter the portal. That's just not enough time to, develop a relationship and watch all the films. So using a data data to help you at least filter down your pool of candidates and saying, is this the kind of guy we want or not, is a real game changer. And that's why so many coaches are using my website and other tools as well to, target guys in the portal and make quick evaluations and find guys who fit specifically what they're looking for.
Are you a math major? Like, what led you to this? I'm just curious. I'm nerding out a little bit now, man. Like, how did you get here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have my PhD in statistics.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But I've always loved it. I've always loved sports from a young age, and applying math always made the most sense to me in sports because there's just so much going on that I always was really eager to apply those numbers and probabilities and things like that to sports. And so it's really fun to be able to apply it in this way because I think a lot of people get it. A lot of people, even if you're not a math person, you can kind of understand why it's important in sports. And so I think it's really fun there.
But triangulating Johnny Broom's location is more geometry, or is that?
Yeah.
I'm not picking up what you're putting down. Sorry.
I love it.
Listen, we're trying different angles here.
All right, guys, we're going to let you go. Evan, why don't you plug yourself a little bit, your website, where they can follow you on X, and man, we really appreciate coming on kind of last minute here.
Yeah. So evanmia.com is where you can find all the stuff. There's really everything for no matter what level of fan you are, if you're a casual fan or a very, analytical, nerdy person like me. There's a lot of stuff there. Player ratings, team ratings, game predictions, lineup analysis, transfer portal stuff, keys to victory, player skill grades, like literally everything. And you can also find links to all my other social media platforms on there. Do a lot of stuff on Twitter, but I'm on Instagram and TikTok and that sort of thing. So you can find links to all that stuff on evanmia.com.
Awesome, man. Well, we really appreciate your time this evening, and maybe we'll talk to you around March Madness.